left religion, Christianity, and fundamentalism, I noticed that within these churches and patriarchal institutions, churches teach its members, male, female, or kids, that men are divinely created and born to lead, to be authority figures, and that women are inferior, unable to lead or teach men. So those who grew up in Christianity or fundamentalism, combination of both, doesn't really matter, you're probably aware that the biggest denominations of Christianity do not allow, encourage, or see female leaders in positions of authority in a positive, uplifting point of view. I was shocked when I was 22 and I went to a Calvinistic church where they had a female being the music minister. And when I mean shocked, I mean because in 22 years, I had never seen a female in a position of authority. Never. And my mother made a big stink about it when we weren't at church. This is how sexism is so prevalent, so rampant. You could not imagine the sexism, how deep it goes. It's like a cancer. My own mother told me year after year that women are not to lead. If you have views like that, you have little to no respect for women. Now, it's okay to think that a woman shouldn't be a leader because she's not educated, she's not qualified, she's rude, maybe she could be a racist or a homophobe. Those are good reasons not to want someone to be a leader. Their gender, their religion, their personal lives, as long as they're decent, legal, morally fearing people, that's the only thing that matters. If you discount someone just because of their gender, that's like not making a birthday cake for a gay couple. It's not okay. Decent, morally centered people don't discriminate against people. They look at qualifications, personality, and who is the best person for the job. Nothing else. You have to have the criteria and experience. It's like a job interview. If you can't do the job, and if the people interviewing you don't have confidence that you are the best choice, then you shouldn't be the one in charge. But that's not always how the world works. My mother always said, scum climbs to the top. Some of the people they would select as pastors or music ministers were not qualified, or they were not the right people for this group of people. And to teach impressionable kids and vulnerable women in church and the next leaders, the males, the men, that women can't be leaders shows an additional layer of sexist contempt for women by and large. In any civilized country or institution, if you went into a medical center and chose the male doctor, just because they're a male doctor, you don't know if they're the most qualified, if they're the best, most skilled, most trained. You don't know that. But you choose the male doctor for your surgery. And they might not even be a surgeon. You don't know. But you would rather choose the male than perhaps the female who's the most qualified, the most trained, or can actually do the job. They don't care. It's all about labels. If somebody isn't cis, heterosexual, a Christian, conservative, pro-life, they don't want anything that doesn't fit and check their boxes. And how many many people lose out on jobs that they're the most qualified for, that they could be the best thing that's ever happened to a church, that they get fired or the church gets excommunicated because, God forbid, you have a woman leading worship service. And yeah, the woman, I think 2 years after we got there, she was fired. Not because she had an affair, not because she was touching kids, because she was a woman. Okay? Can you imagine? Can you imagine going to medical school? You are valedictorian. You get at least 3 written recommendation letters. You went to Johns Hopkins. You studied under the most brilliant minds in the world. But because you're a woman, you don't get hired, you get fired, you get turned away. Like, what kind of logic is that? It does not make sense. But you can justify it. You can justify all of your hatred, your sexism, your lack of just understanding how a decent society works. They don't care. They will choose the most boring candidate, the most straight, the most cookie cutter. They see it as an affront to their masculinity. If a woman isn't even considered, which she never is, not any time in 30 years was a woman ever considered for any senior leadership where anyone 16 or older who was a man was involved. You want to know sexism? Women in church, they view them as kids. They infantilize them. If you don't see women as potential leaders, potential pastors, potential disciplers, you view women like they need to be led like sheep. In the last episode, I went into depth how men see female leadership. At least a dozen videos so far. I've told the audience that my family in every church, every leader, in any church I was in, regardless of denomination, viewed women in charge as a deficit of male leadership potential. If a woman was chosen or got the job by default, being a wife or a sister or a mother of a member, it was only because no other men were available. They either couldn't hire a man because they didn't have the budget. Maybe no man in 3 years would even apply because who in the world would want to live in Alaska for half of the salary that is offered to live in a place like Georgia, Florida, or Tennessee for twice the salary? And it was really, really hard to find interim or hire pastors long term because 98% of the people who applied didn't want to come up here. And can't honestly blame them. Who in the fuck would want to live in Alaska? And I don't mean to insult people who really like living in cold places, but you have to be a special type of person to have want to move here or who has experience living here. Because most of the people who applied, like 99%, had never lived in an ultra cold environment. They had never experienced sub-below weather. They weren't qualified to live up here because they just, honestly, looking back, they probably would have ended up like Jack Torrance at the end of The Shining. They were not equipped or had the passion to be up here. And when you view women as not qualified leaders, you're teaching the next male, female, and any orientation membership, the next generation, that women are inferior. And in the Bible, very few to none of females, even royalty, got education. There were kings of England that could not read and write any language, let alone English. And until halfway through this last century, women weren't even allowed to get educated above what we would call fourth grade material. And when they talk about in the Bible that women are to be silent, they weren't talking about women. They were talking about people who didn't have the qualifications or the educational background to do anything that wasn't noise. And women back then just could not get the education that was pivotal to being a minister. And that's why, for centuries and a millennium, women could not serve as preachers and reverends, because women were lucky to learn how to read and write, let alone go to a seminary. And I read a lot of books of theologians. Before the 1900s, women weren't even considered for university, let alone seminary. And until a certain time period, it was illegal for women to go to seminary. For a woman to be able to read and do math during the time period that our country was founded, they called women witches if they could read and do math equivalent of what a man could do. Women couldn't be teachers, and they could not be pastors because society didn't allow or give women the education, experience, and academic background that was pivotal for leaders in Christianity. And I honestly believe men did this on purpose so that 51% of the population wouldn't be competition. It's hard to rebel, to demand rights, if you can't read and don't know what other places around the globe have that you don't. And that's why the Catholic Church grip on power really eased and evaporated. Because once you can print, once you can read, and once you cut out the middleman, the Catholic Church, and can do everything yourself, which is how the Protestant denominations were created, you don't need to see yourself as second class. And when women realize that any institution, religious or secular, that doesn't see them as possible leaders of tomorrow or today, you're better off leaving. And I don't care how progressive the Catholic Church think they are. If you've never had a female, a gay, or anything but a white, cis, heterosexual, privileged man in positions of bishops, cardinals, and consistently as pope, you're not progressive. You're fooling yourself. And when Christianity, specifically the Southern Baptist conventions or fundamentalist hierarchies, throw out a decent, God-fearing church who dares have a female leader, whether for music, theology, or education, they will throw you out of the convention for daring to have a female in a position of power. That is the level of contempt and hatred that men have for cis, heterosexual women of femininity. That's why they hate gay people. Because any man with the potential of leadership who is anything but the expected toxic masculinity trope is inherently viewed as feminine. That's why the word effeminate has the look of feminine in it. That's why any words that are derogatory about emotion and just internalized emotion, that's why they use Greek and Latin pronouns and words for femininity. That's why we get the word crazy and hysterical. They all come from prefixes and words associated with ovaries and feminine reproduction. And this is why any institution, religious or secular, who doesn't see women as potential competitive leadership material, get out. They don't see you as fully human. And to quote a certain pastor that Trump likes, women aren't people. Women are where people come out of. And not to be crude, but the average conservative man, or the average man, period, sees women as holes, the mothers of their children, or a woman who needs to shut up. And anything beyond that, I'm shocked if somebody believes differently.